100 years later, and yeah, exactly, still inspiring all kinds of things, like so many different forms of media that have some kind of reference to Cthulhu and the Lovecraft and his mythos, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, also
Um,
like there's the cult of there's like the Cthulhu cult where like they're trying to resurrect him, which that's like the most interesting part of the mythos is that like Cthulhu's
yeah,
not really doing anything, but he is like while he is affecting people through their dreams,
hmm
Cthulhu is also sleeping and dormant, and like this cult is just trying to wake him up. Like this crazy like cult that worships him.
yeah,
They're trying to wake him up so that he can like destroy the universe or do whatever, but I think the cult thinks that they can control him to
yeah,
like do their bidding, which is clearly not going to happen.
yeah.
So it's just
I,
pretty much going to end the entire universe as they know it.
I think a lot of that kind of comes from, Lovecraft lived through World War One, and the horror of World War One really inspired a lot of these writers and a lot of philosophy, like nihilism and existentialism really came out a lot in the early 20th century as a direct result of the horrors that people experienced from World War One. And I think that kind of like plays into it a little bit too with the way uh, Lovecraft kind of crafts these doomsday cults that are really trying to bring about the end of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and the end of humanity. It's a lot of it is it's just the a lot of people were kind of like sickened by what they saw in World War One and what had happened because the
Well, at
death and
this,
destruction.
yeah, I mean, at this point in time, it was the worst that anyone had witnessed at
Yeah,
that point that was alive.
yeah, it was just horrifying and inspired so much like dark literature and dark philosophy to come out of it because people were just so fed up when they were like, is this really like what life is? It's just like death and horror and people getting like massacred and just, millions dying, Um, it's almost as if like, in Ghostbusters, you have like the cult of Gozer that's trying, I was it, I Ivor Shando or whatever who's trying to bring about the end of the world, by summoning Gozer. It's that's obviously very much inspired by the Cthulhu mythos.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, anytime you see like a cult that's trying to like bring about the end of the world, it's pretty much a direct reference to Lovecraft.
oh yeah, absolutely. Um,
One other thing about his grave site on his there on the headstone that he has in Swan Point Cemetery. Um, there's a there's a phrase from one of his letters that marks his grave.
mhm.
And it's called the line is "I am Providence," which I think
Yeah,
is really cool. But yeah, Lovecraft, he I think he just dedicated so much of his life to his writings, and that's why he was, very antisocial and just
hmm
more asexual. Where like he wasn't interested in anything except for his work, and like
yeah,
seeing its success. And the poor guy, he like strived for success so many like for his entire life, and and like towards the end, the Cthulhu mythos, the Cthulhu mythos had been published, but but like whoever had published it just there were like so many errors in it,
hmm
and they just did a really bad job of publishing his works
yeah,
that like they just sold poorly, and like he was disgusted by it because he was like, this is like, what did this idiot do to my work?
yeah. That was when they actually made it into a book because
Yeah,
originally when he was publishing his stories, they were in pulp magazines, which
yeah,
those who don't know, pulp magazines are, they were magazines that were made of a certain type of paper that was like a wood pulp. So it had like a very specific feel to the magazine. And oftentimes they were like science fiction and horror stories. And, actually the term pulp fiction and, the movie are based off of that, it's just like kind of like these, they weren't really highbrow, so to speak. It was kind of like more for, the common man, it wasn't like a highbrow kind of thing. And like, that's why a lot of the times it was kind of like, for the time, would probably be considered sleazy or smutty, because it was like a lot of like, sex and really violence, a lot of violence and horror and scary stuff. So that's why, and the pulp magazines they were published super cheaply. It was kind of like a cult following thing. So a lot of writers like Lovecraft kind of publish their stories in pulp magazines like that. And oftentimes, if they were, Lovecraft wrote mostly short stories, but he did write some novels. So basically it would be like, it would be chapter 1 would be in this issue, and the next issue is chapter 2. And it would be serialized like that. And I guess they eventually, towards the end of his life, they kind of took all of them and just made it into an actual novel. And that's when there was so many mistakes, and he was disgusted by it. Because it didn't work. They didn't do it right.
Right, like I think his quote of it, like, after he had like written his last story or something like that, it was like, he said something along the lines of like, the shadow over Innsmouth has gone out of its way to destroy my career, or something like that.
Yeah.
Just because he was just so like upset about the way that this publishing company had handled it. And I mean, there was a point in time he was actually friends with Harry Houdini, mm-hmm. and like Houdini was like trying to help him out, actually, to introduce him to like the head of like a big newspaper,
mm-hmm.
and like unfortunately Harry Houdini died, so before he could really like broker that deal or like get that meeting together, so like nothing ended up happening like after it. But like he really like strived to like succeed and like get wealthy from his work, and like he didn't get a chance to see the recognition that he would get eventually. He's kind of like what they call in the music industry a catalog artist, where like Otis Redding is like one of the biggest catalog artists, where like meaning when the work is released, it doesn't sell well at first, but over time it ends up doing like gangbusters.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like more of what it is that he ended up becoming a catalog guy, where like, even though like he didn't make a whole lot of money while he was alive, like writing all these things, he wrote such a huge body of work that like years later it just inspired so many different things that that like people to this day, and probably long after you and I are gone, that will have all this, will not be able to get enough of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, that is, unless like someone tries to cancel H.P. Lovecraft because of his racist views, which
whatever.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised. They already got rid of Dr. Seuss's stuff because they couldn't handle it.
Right.
So like, whatever.